Senator Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for holding such a timely hearing. And I thank all of the witnesses for joining today. You know, I came to today's hearing truly with an open mind, believing that free and fair access to voting was in the best interest of both parties and all Americans. And I did find one thing that I agree with Mr. Von Spakovsky about. It is not 1965, sir. It is the year of our Lord 2024. And just because we are not being asked to count the number of jelly beans in a jar or bubbles on a bar of soap does not mean that states and local jurisdictions are not indeed continuing to discriminate. I held a hearing in Montgomery, Alabama just last week, learning about the restrictive laws that were being considered in the Alabama state legislature, targeting, in my opinion, and the opinion of many legal scholars in the state, and those who were being asked to serve under those laws, targeting communities of color, Black Alabamians, people with disabilities. And I would like to start my question with you, Ms. Lincoln, about communities, people who live in the disability community. In Alabama's SB 1 that just passed the House last week, there are criminal penalties for being proposed with up to a decade in prison for those who would assist someone who is living in our community with disabilities with filling out and completing their absentee ballot. We heard the testimony of Laurel Hatton in Alabama, who suffers from lupus and is unable to drive. She would be subject to up to a decade in prison if she gave her neighbor $5 to take her to the poll to cast her ballot. Now, we know that there are many millions of Americans who live with disabilities just like Ms. Hatton. Can you talk to us about any cases that the ACLU find themselves in litigation specific to discrimination targeted towards people in the disability community?
Yes, absolutely, and thank you for that question. Unfortunately, voters with disabilities are far too long, have been overlooked, and there is unfortunately an enormous cross-section between voters of disabilities and voters of color, voters with low income and the like. And we've seen these attacks, a similar attack as you've mentioned in Alabama, in places like Mississippi and Georgia, and we are engaged in litigation in both. In Mississippi, have been so far successful in blocking a restriction on who can provide assistance to voters with disabilities in casting their ballot, which I think we should all be extraordinarily concerned about.
And I wonder what kind of political crusade it might be to advance a person living in a wheelchair to access the ballot. Thank you so much. Mr. Hewitt, we also learned about the story of Mayor Patrick Braxton, who was elected the first Black mayor of a small town of New Bern, Alabama. These are some, I think Mr. Braxton's case is an example of the updated but undeniably discriminatory practices in evolution of state and local jurisdictions. We heard about Mr. Braxton, who was literally locked out of City Hall after being duly elected the mayor of New Bern, but he was locked out by his formerly all-white city council and prevented from taking his seat. Can you, and has your organization seen instances of this kind of blatant voter suppression, updated and modernized voter suppression of election result rejection that is happening across the country?
We certainly have. I think the most marked example is not the January 6th insurrection, but what happened before then, when the Lawyers Committee and the NAACP sought to intervene in some 15 cases after the 2022 elections were over, where folks were trying to use the courts, state courts, to overturn elections. And sometimes they use extrajudicial means as well. And so we needed to have an answer in the courts of law. because the court of public opinion is clear that the election results were over and that we needed a peaceful transfer of power. And so we're very worried about the same thing happening at the federal level, at the local level, and at the state level once again.
Thank you, Mr. Hewitt. Mr. Chair, I'm done with my questions and yield back the time.